Okay, so I wanted to give my immediate thoughts after watching this new documentary that just came up on Prime Video. And if you don't know, it's Soo-Man, King of K-pop, and it's about the guy behind SM Entertainment. Now, he's no longer in charge of SM Entertainment, and that is covered at the end of the documentary. But yeah, he's one of the formative figures of K-pop. You've probably heard of him, but even if you haven't, he's impacted so many artists with their careers, including Girls' Generation, EXO, TVXQ, aespa, and so many others. And yeah, I was initially worried, like, is this just going to be a puff piece? Is this just going to be, to kind of promote him? Because there's a lot of controversies surrounding Lee Soo-man, and I didn't want it to be that. Well, thankfully, I don't think it was that. In fact, especially with kind of his departure from the company and the way that was handled, the fact that that's included at all is shocking to me. If he had been more involved, but it seems like truly he was more a subject. I didn't see him as a producer, executive producer, anything like that on the documentary. Now, before going into more of the content, I want to just talk about it as a documentary. So stylistically, I thought there were some cool choices. And the way the past is interwoven with the present is especially neat. And I just think visually it's really cool. There's actually a lot of elements that feel very SM. SM always kind of has their artists play on these like sound stages, and Lee Soo-man ends up kind of transporting to different worlds and different times through the same kind of technology, and it feels very fitting. But yeah, it just visually and the way it's constructed, I think it's a really strong documentary. Now, going through some of the content, you learn a lot about the early years of SM, the early years of K-pop, and really how Lee Soo-man did indeed kind of create the mold of what we're living in now. And that's for better or worse, because you have TVXQ, this is back when they were, all together, and, famously, they split from the company. At least 3 of the members, 2, stayed on, argued about slave contracts, that they were there for 13 years. At least Soo-man still was kind of in denial about basically any treatment. Still said, hey, the court never fully said, we did anything wrong. They did change their contracts, but they said they haven't changed them since kind of working with the artist organization back then, so their contracts are still comparatively similar. So yeah, Soo-man kind of was not really buying the the argument that he was in the wrong or SM was in the wrong. And it was interesting because, especially, I brought it up before, but I think it's so much more true seeing it now, how, yeah, the story of NJZ, aka NewJeans, is a lot more close to this than I think people realize, both in the way the company interacted, the way that SM Entertainment reacted, the way that the industry reacted. I mean, JYJ was in many ways blackballed. Hopefully that's not the future for, NGZ, but there's just so many things that really are reminiscent of this fight, and I think people need to watch it for that alone, among other things. Oh, of course, again, I want to talk about how, they did discuss the formation of these groups and just how SM works. And for people that don't like the way modern K-pop is done, SM is definitely a big reason for that. You have artists that get there as early as 13, if not a little younger, and they train for like 3+ years, and then they debut. And, his original reasoning was he was really trying to target the youth, but a lot of people now, especially a lot of fans, are like, it's too young. It's too young. And one thing, too, is SM Entertainment, is home to SHINee and FX, and they cover, Jungkook suicide. I know that's one of the elements of this movie that already got a lot of flack, because you see footage, outside of fans. They do discuss it. Suwon definitely is still grappling with it. He doesn't quite know. He's just still trying to fully understand, and that kind of loss. You know, we're never going to be truly able to fully understand. But then you had Sully, and it's just really difficult, but easily the hardest part of the movie. So just heads up if you're especially sensitive to that. But yeah, it's the kind of pressure that actually there's a journalist who kind of interestingly said it's not even just the K-pop. They actually made the claim that kind of calling it a K-pop problem or the dark side of K-pop is too easy, and that maybe it's more societal. She kind of says the Korean society at large has issues kind of with these kind of pressures. Entertainment industries across the world kind of have issues, but I know like one of my friends who's a huge fan of a lot of these SM artists. That's kind of why she got out. She just saw the harm that was happening and the suffering. And so yeah, it's complicated. But yeah, this movie does touch on that. So again, heads up. Lastly, it does kind of discuss the future of K-pop, and you see, again, in covering kind of what K-pop used to be, and you have cool interviews with like BoA, you have interviews with a member of HOT, and other artists, kind of throughout the years. You really see how it's evolved, what has evolved, what hasn't evolved. aespa is, of course, one of the more exciting artists that they have right now, and to see how they, use the virtual spaces and kind of their quote-unquote avatars is, been fascinating. But, it's SM not really at the peak of their power. They had the big fight with Hybe, and this was part of what Lee Soo-Man was involved with about the shares, and so it's just kind of fascinating to see where this is at, and it definitely left on a note because it is mostly about Lee Soo-Man, that he's onto his own kind of future journey, but we'll still kind of have to see for SM Entertainment because they're still out there, they're still active. A lot of their older artists, have kind of dissolved, and maybe they'll have like some of the solo members there. But yeah, it's not the peak of the power SM, but they're still around. So yeah, ultimately, again, there's a few dark spots, so you just be warned. But otherwise, I think it was quite fascinating. Once more, for the NJZ NewJeans connection, I would really recommend people check it out. See what you think about, especially how Soo-Man kind of reacts again to the TVXQ, question. Essentially them, leaving the company, many of them leaving the company. But yeah, it's just a fascinating look that covers so much more than even what I expected, both of the man's life, but also K-pop in general. So yeah, it's on Amazon Prime now, and let me know what you think if you watch it. I'd love to hear your thoughts.